You think you're craving someone, but deep down, it's your wound wanting to be seen. That person who keeps you awake at night isn't love, it's just a reflection of your family emptiness coming back to collect. What if what you call passion is just your shadow trying to trap you in the same prison again? It's not destiny, it's repetition, it's compulsion. If this made sense, sign up now, because here you'll hear the truths that no one has the courage to tell. You call it love, but your body knows. It's a wound pulsing beneath your skin, disguised as enchantment. The shiver you insist on romanticizing is the shadow rubbing its chains inside you. When someone looks at you and the ground disappears, it's not fate, it's memory. It's the echo of an ancient scream never heard. You say you've found chemistry, but chemistry is just biological code to justify the emotional prison you already know. Your heart races not because you've found the right thing, but because you've perfectly recognized the wrong thing. It's the familiar emptiness knocking on the door in new clothes, calling you back to the dark room of childhood. Carl Jung warned, "The unconscious doesn't forget, it repeats, and you call repetition passion. Rapture is just the body trying to repair what it never had, but the body is naive. It believes this time it will work. So you throw yourself in, surrender, call pain intensity, and call compulsion love. But deep down, you know, if it hurts from the start, it was never love. It's the echo of the same lack. It's the wound crying out for redemption, not the heart celebrating reunion. It's the shadow trying to write the same story again, but always with the same ending. Take a cruel but simple test. Take 3 names that have consumed you like fire and write the symptoms next to them. Shortness of breath, knots in your stomach, sleepless nights, eyes glued to your phone searching for scraps of attention. Now go back in time. Remember the first time you felt invisible, rejected, forgotten. Compare the sensations. They're the same. The body is a precise machine. It recognizes emotional patterns before the mind does. That's why that magical encounter seemed so irresistible, because it was familiar, not because it was real. It was the familiar emptiness dressed in new skin. Compulsion makes it seem urgent, as if it were now or never, as if the world would end if you didn't have that person. But it's a lie. It's not the world that ends. It's your inner child begging to be chosen this time. When you call anxiety passion, you're only feeding the same prison that held you hostage for years. The worst part is that you even know it, but you persist, because the shadow is seductive. It makes poison taste like salvation. Carl Jung said that what you don't bring to consciousness returns as fate. Well, that's what happens. You confuse love with abstinence from absence, and each time you repeat it, the cell becomes more beautiful, but it's still a cell. Now stop and look with brutal honesty. What you call passion may just be the wound dictating rules. The silence between messages corrodes you more than presence nourishes. The butterflies in your stomach feel like desire, but they're disguised fear. Fear of being forgotten again. You're not choosing, you're obeying an ancient script. This script was written in the cradle of your family's emptiness, when love was scarce, when affection was a prize and never a gift. That's why today you confuse chaos with intensity. Your body has learned that peace is boredom, that stability is a lack of emotion. So you chase the fire, even knowing it burns. Compulsion is like this. It dresses chains with silk, makes you believe that pain is proof of depth. And you, enchanted, accept it. But if you're honest, you'll realize it's not love you feel, it's a loss trying to heal. With every hurried kiss, with every cutting absence, with every desperate return, it's not you who chooses, it's the shadow. And the shadow doesn't want your peace. It just wants to repeat itself. At the next meeting, the question is, who inside you is longing? If it's the wound, prepare yourself, because the next step isn't a meeting, it's jail. And that's where we begin to acknowledge the void. You believe you've fallen in love with the person in front of you, but deep down, what you found was an echo of the familiar emptiness. That same hole that opened when the embrace didn't come, when the affectionate word was denied, when the look you expected passed you by. That's why, before certain looks, you tremble as if it were fate. It's not fate, it's recognition. You recognize in the other's skin the same absence that shaped your childhood. And absence has a scent, a rhythm, a tone. When your body reacts, it's not to the person, it's to the memory. It's like returning to a familiar room, only now with more beautiful walls. But the essence is the same, silence where there should be welcome. Carl Jung said that the unconscious moves with surgical precision, and it's this precision that makes you feel alive around someone who, in truth, only activates your wound. You call it connection, but it's compulsion in disguise. Genuine love embraces, but what you feel only repeats. And repeating is being trapped in a script not written by you, but by absence. The real danger is not in loving, but in not realizing who inside you is choosing. See how this works in practice. Imagine a woman who grew up listening to the deafening silence of an absent father. Now an adult, she walks into a bar and among dozens of glances, locks onto that of the coldest, most inaccessible, most distant man. She didn't choose him by chance. She was chosen by the familiar emptiness that resides within her, guided by the broken compass of her shadow. It is this shadow that whispers, "Here's the chance to finally be seen." But this chance is an illusion, because the absent only knows how to repeat absence. The cycle continues, crumbs of attention transformed into emotional feasts, rejection converted into a test of intensity, pain mistaken for love. And when she suffers, the rational mind calls it bad luck, but the unconscious calls it coherence. The body always seeks what it knows, even if it's poison. Therefore, what burns so strongly isn't magic, it's compulsion repeating the same scene. You think you love someone, but you only recognize in the other the old, untreated pain. Now take a deep breath and look at yourself. Ask yourself, why are you attracted to those who can't give you what you need? Why does the person who calms you seem dull, while the one who ignores you keeps you awake until dawn? It's because your emotional compass was calibrated in chaos, not peace. Familiar emptiness taught your soul to mistake rejection for home. And so, every time you lose yourself in someone unreachable, it's like returning to the same cold childhood home. Your heart races not forward but backward, and you call the future what is actually the past in disguise. This person's silence echoes the silence of your own history. The prison is invisible because it feels familiar, and familiarity is addictive. That's why you insist on calling love what is nothing more than emotional compulsion. But if you look closely, you'll realize what you desire isn't the other person. It's to be rescued from the absence that shaped you. And it's precisely at this point that projection begins to rear its ugly head like a treacherous mirror. You believe you see the other, but in reality, you're standing before a dirty mirror of your own shadow. What you call enchantment is just projection, the inner figures shaped by the parts you've disowned. Carl Jung called these hidden reflections that inhabit the psyche, anima and animus. When they appear before you, clothed in flesh and blood, the fascination is immediate. It's not the person that captivates you, it's the internal image you project onto them. You don't love the other, you love the chance to reclaim what you've buried, the tenderness, the strength, the anger, the surrender, the affection that was denied you. This is the trap. You fall in love not with who the person is, but with what they activate in your wound. And projection is treacherous because it seems magical. You idealize, romanticize, transform the other into an idol, a savior, a whole. But the idol is nothing more than a fantasy. The other can't support the weight of what is yours. What happens next? The collapse. And you call this collapse disappointment, when in fact it is liberation. Consider real-life examples. A man who has repressed his sensitivity because he's learned that men don't cry meets a loving, emotional, open woman. He doesn't see her as she is. He sees in her his own amputated tenderness. She becomes unknowingly the incarnation of his anima. He loses himself in her not because he loves her, but because he recognizes a part of himself he could never experience. And when she walks away, it's not just her absence that hurts. It's his own absence, projected outward. On the other hand, a woman who has always repressed her strength and anger falls in love with a firm, dominant, confident man. But it's not him she desires. It's her own hidden anima, which she now calls a prince or a demon. This dance is seductive because it gives us the illusion of completeness. But it's also the most sophisticated prison, because you believe you've found the love of your life, when you've only rediscovered the part of yourself that was cast into the shadows. And if you don't realize it, you're always running after what's yours, always in someone else's hands. Projection is like theater. You write the script, assign roles, and put the other person on stage without their knowledge. You expect them to play the role of the savior, the missing mother, the withheld father, the affection that never came. And when they don't perform as you expected, the stage collapses. The problem isn't the other person, it's your unconscious expectations. Love becomes dependency because you ask someone to heal a wound that isn't their responsibility. And the more intense the projection, the more devastating the fall will be. Because what was at stake was never the other person, it was always you. What you call loss is just the end of an illusion. It's hard to accept, but necessary. Until you integrate these internal figures, you will remain trapped in the dance of compulsion, always trying to love pieces of yourself in other people's bodies. Projection is the most comfortable cell of the unconscious, because you believe you're free while you're a slave. And when the spell breaks, you call it failure, but it's just the shadow's call to be recognized, and it's at this point that seduction becomes real danger. The shadow never asks for permission. It invades, dons perfume, and presents itself as desire. You believe you're standing before someone irresistible, but in reality, you're standing before the parts of yourself you've denied. The anger you never dared express, the eroticism you repressed, the ambition you condemned, all of it finds a body to manifest. And when it appears, you feel you have no choice. It's a dark magnetism, an invisible current pulling you toward an abyss. Carl Jung said, "Until you become conscious of what's in the shadow, it will direct your life." This is what happens when you mistake fascination for love. It's not love. It's your own wound demanding a stage. It's the impulse that throws you against the wall, that quickens your breathing, and that turns peace into boredom. It's proof that the shadow seduces not to heal you, but to imprison you. What should be an encounter becomes a prison, because you don't see the other, only the reflection of what you never accepted within yourself. Desire becomes poison, and you drink it thinking it's wine. Look at the patterns in your life. How many times have you been drawn to the very person who represented everything you claimed to reject? The irresponsible, the distant, the cold, the unpredictable. The mind says, "I don't want this," but the body runs as if for survival. It's compulsion, disguised as passion. The shadow manifests precisely in the figures who most unsettle you. They carry within them the traits you yourself have buried, and that's why they disturb you. It's not about the person's charm, it's about the energy of what you've repressed, and therein, deep down, lies a paradox. The more you try to escape, the closer you get. Desire is born from the forbidden, and the forbidden wields power. This is the seduction of the shadow, making you believe you're free when you're just repeating yourself. The butterflies in your stomach are just the familiar emptiness reenacting the same drama. The wound finds a stage, the body applauds, but in the end, it's your soul who pays the price. Want a brutal exercise? List 5 traits you hate in the people you're attracted to. Now ask, how many of these traits also live within me, but I hide them? The answer is uncomfortable, but liberating. The arrogant person who fascinates you may be a reflection of your own buried ambition. The cold person who freezes you may be your own unacknowledged indifference. The manipulative seducer who traps you may be the face of your need to control. The shadow doesn't appear to please you, it appears to reveal you. And until you look at it, you'll remain trapped in the cycle of calling love what is merely compulsion. The silence between encounters, the power play, the tension that addicts you, all of this is no coincidence. It's the prison of your own psyche disguised as romance. The question that remains is, how long will you allow your shadow to dictate who deserves your body, your soul, and your story? Because if you don't choose to face it, it will continue to choose for you. And in the next step, this dance transforms into a theater of manipulation and power. Seduction, when born from the shadows, is never innocent. It's theater, a game of masks in which every gesture has a script, every silence a calculation, every look a trap. You believe you're experiencing intimacy, but what exists is refined manipulation. Carl Jung once said that where there is no consciousness, there is acting. And on the stage of the unconscious, you are not the protagonist, you are a puppet. Desire becomes a string, the wound becomes the director, and the play always ends in imprisonment. One gives crumbs and calls them presents, the other begs for attention and calls them love. It's war disguised as romance. And the more intense the games, the more you believe there is depth, but there is no depth in someone who needs to dominate you to feel alive. Coldness dresses in mystery, absence dresses in power, contempt dresses in masculinity or feminine charm. And you, hungry for the familiar emptiness, swallow the plot as if it were a banquet. But deep down, you know, nothing there is food. It's a spectacle, and you are both audience and actor. See how it happens. There are men who have learned that the more distant they are, the more desired they become. They use silence as a weapon, distributing attention in measured doses, just enough to keep you dependent. They don't want to love you, they want to possess you. On the other hand, there are women who grew up believing they needed to be irresistible to deserve affection. They have transformed sensuality into a sword, desire into control. They don't want to be loved, they want to be needed. They want to see you on your knees, begging, so they can never again relive the rejection that marked them. This is the theater of seduction and power. No one loves anyone. Everyone loves the reflection of their own lack. What you mistake for love is just competition, who dominates, who gives in, who goes crazy first. And the more involved you become, the tighter the prison tightens. The silence between acts isn't rest, it's strategy. The kiss isn't surrender, it's bait. And you, blind, call destiny what is merely manipulation. But make no mistake, this theater only works because you participate. The other can manipulate, but they only have power because your wound opens up space. The familiar emptiness demands attention, begs for a stage, and you accept being a character. You let yourself be hypnotized by the cold gaze because deep down you recognize that childhood ice. You surrender to shallow promises because you've grown accustomed to living on crumbs. The compulsion keeps you trapped, believing that if you endure long enough, you'll be rewarded. But reward never comes. What comes is repetition, and repetition is self-loss. In this theater, intimacy doesn't exist. What exists is a performance between two hungry egos. The shadow dons a costume, desire becomes a weapon, love becomes an empty word. And when you finally realize it, you're too tired to leave. That's when you understand that the manipulation was never about the other. It was about you, about your inability to break the script. Because the real challenge isn't defeating the other, but facing your own shadow that insists on turning affection into war. And it is at this point that the show evolves into something even more cruel, the compulsion to repeat. You believe you choose your loves, but in reality, it's the compulsion that chooses for you. It always takes you back to the same face in different bodies. The name changes, the perfume changes, but the sensation is identical. The same butterflies in your stomach, the same lump in your throat, the same silence that consumes you. Carl Jung called this repetition, the unconscious that insists on reliving the scene until you become conscious. Your wound is running the show, not you, and it lacks creativity. It repeats, repeats, repeats. With each new relationship, you believe it will work out, that you've found true love. But it's not love, it's a script. It's the familiar emptiness masking itself as destiny. You didn't fall in love with the person, you fell in love with the possibility of healing what was never healed. But the healing doesn't come because you're still trying to stitch it back together with the same rusty needles. The unconscious doesn't forget, and until you look within, you'll remain a prisoner of this compulsion. Imagine a successful, admired spiritual man. In everyone's eyes, he has everything. But in love, he always chooses the same figure, cold, distant, inaccessible women. He suffers, begs, insists, as if he were in a war he must win. But the war isn't with them. It's with the absent mother who never chose him. His unconscious repeats, hoping for a different ending. And he believes that if he conquers this impossible woman, he will finally be seen. But it never is. The ending is always the same. Rejection, absence, pain. This is the cruel logic of the compulsion to repeat. You don't love the person, you love the echo of your wound. With each attempt, you reinforce the chains of your own prison, and you still call it fate. The silence between one response and the next, the calculated distance, all of this holds you tighter, because it resonates with that familiar void that has never been filled. You become addicted not to the person, but to the feeling of lack. Because that's what you know, and what's familiar feels like love, even if it's torture. Now look at your life. How many times have you said, "Why do I always choose wrong?" It's not choice. It's programming. It's the shadow pushing you into the same traps. It's the compulsion that guides you like a dog chasing a scent. You say you seek peace, but you only feel alive in war. You say you want affection, but you only chase after those who don't give it. This isn't bad luck, it's pattern, and patterns don't break on their own. You need to name the wound, acknowledge the familiar emptiness, face the discomfort of not confusing calm with boredom. It's cruel, but it's real. Until you look within, your love life will be an echo of the same trauma. You'll continue to call pain intensity, absence depth, chaos love, and you'll remain trapped because the unconscious won't stop. It repeats itself until you realize, only when you face this cycle can you break, and breaking isn't easy. It requires cutting your own skin to free your soul from the chain, and this cut opens the portal to the next stage, the call of individuation. There comes a point where compulsion no longer satisfies. The poison no longer intoxicates, the game no longer distracts, the body can no longer bear another fall. This is where the call of individuation comes, not as a gentle invitation, but as a scream piercing the heart. Carl Jung said, "To individuate is to become whole." And whole isn't pretty, it's painful. It's looking at the shadow without a filter, at the wound without anesthesia, at the familiar void without excuses. Individuation demands the courage to drop the masks, to stop blaming others, and face your own prison. Because no one imprisons you except the unconscious you never dared to face. The call comes in the form of discomfort. Relationships that once excited now only tire. Games that were once addictive now seem ridiculous. It's like waking up in a cell and realizing the key was always in your pocket. But be careful. Opening the door isn't the end, it's the beginning. The beginning of walking through the darkness, of talking to ghosts, of gathering the pieces of the soul you abandoned. Individuation is a daily task, not instant enlightenment. Want a practical exercise? Write down in a notebook all the traits you most admire in the people who have fascinated you. Now ask yourself, how many of these traits are mine, but I've never experienced? This is the map of your anima or animus. The tenderness you idolize in others may be your own repressed tenderness. The strength you find irresistible may be your own stifled strength. What you think you love is just you asking for space. Another exercise. List what you hate most about the people who have hurt you. Then ask yourself, how much of this is also mine, but hidden? This is the territory of the shadow. This is what individuation demands. No longer projecting, but integrating. Stop waiting for someone to complete what's missing and finally accept that the lack is your responsibility. It's hard work because the ego resists, screams, defends itself. But it's necessary work because only then does love cease to be a compulsion and become a conscious choice. Individuation is brutal because it requires shedding illusions. You will no longer believe in soulmates, in overwhelming passions, in promises of completeness. You will learn that all of this was your wound asking for a stage. The true path is not to find someone to save you, but to become self-sufficient. And that doesn't mean living alone, it means living whole. It's when you look at someone and say, I choose you, but I already have myself. It's when silence is no longer torture, but rest. It's when the familiar emptiness ceases to be a prison and becomes a fertile space for creating new ways of existing. This is the call of individuation, integrating light and shadow, tenderness and strength, vulnerability and power. Only then does desire cease to be compulsion and become celebration. But this path doesn't end there, because in becoming whole, you discover something even deeper, that true love is not born of need, but of presence. And it is precisely at this point that the journey takes us to the next revelation. You've spent your life confusing intensity with depth, but now you need to learn the difference. True love isn't born of lack, it's born of presence. When you seek someone to fill the family void, what you call romance is just anesthesia. And the anesthesia wears off, but the pain returns. Real love isn't begging, it's not chasing, it's not losing yourself. It's being whole before the other without the need to beg for attention. The silence that was once torture now transforms into comfort. You no longer need someone to prove your worth because you already recognize your own. This is the revolution, transforming compulsion into choice. When you love without self-harm, the shadow no longer dictates your roles. The other isn't a savior, isn't a villain, isn't a compliment. They're just someone you can walk with. And that's no less intense, it's more genuine, because the intensity born of need consumes. The intensity born of presence warms. Love as presence doesn't imprison, it liberates. Want a practical example? Imagine a relationship where there's no game, where the other person doesn't disappear to increase desire, doesn't manipulate you to feel powerful, doesn't feed your anxiety as a form of control. Instead, there's constancy. Messages answered without delay. Looks that don't hide secrets. Silence that doesn't weigh heavy but rather rests. Many would say, this is boring. It isn't. It's a body unaccustomed to peace, trained to mistake chaos for passion. What's missing isn't fire, it's the compulsion to repeat the pain. This is the training, retraining your nervous system to call tranquility life, not boredom. Reading a book next to someone and still feeling connected, sleeping peacefully instead of crying over absence, laughing at trivial things instead of suffering through games. This is true love, not the kind that keeps you trapped, but the kind that gives you wings to continue being yourself. The familiar emptiness loses its strength when you learn you can exist without begging for completeness. But make no mistake, loving as presence requires maturity. It requires looking within and recognizing your shadow without outsourcing blame. It requires stopping romanticizing the wound and accepting that you deserve more than crumbs. It requires courage to let go of those who only know how to feed your compulsion. When you reach this level, something changes. Desire is no longer a consuming explosion. It is a continuous fire that sustains. You no longer need constant proof because you no longer seek in others the validation you lacked in childhood. Silence at someone's side ceases to be a threat and becomes a living presence. Love as presence is not born of hunger, it is born of abundance. You don't ask, you share, you don't demand, you offer, you don't beg, you choose. This is the point at which the soul stops running and begins to walk. But this walking brings a deeper revelation, that true freedom is not in the other but in you, and it is in this liberation that the next step of the journey reveals itself, the encounter with the silence that liberates. Silence has always frightened you. Deep within, you heard the echo of the familiar emptiness, the very one that shaped your desperate search for love. But there comes a time when silence ceases to be a prison and becomes a portal. When you learn to endure the void without rushing to fill it, you discover that there lies freedom. The silence that once screamed rejection now whispers presence. It reveals that you don't need games, crumbs, or calculated absences to feel alive. True love isn't a scream, it's calm, it's not compulsion, it's choice. When the noise of need falls silent, you hear something new, your own voice. It's this voice that reminds you that the shadow isn't an enemy, but a part. That the wound isn't a sentence, but a portal. And that freedom isn't being with someone who never abandons you, but being able to be with yourself without abandoning yourself. Silence liberates because it returns the key to your own cell. Try this in practice. Spend an entire day without seeking external contact, without messages, without social media. Just you, your body, your mind. At first, anxiety will scream. The familiar emptiness will nudge, begging to be numbed. Your compulsion will beg for distraction, any distraction. But if you resist, something changes. Gradually, your mind slows, your breathing becomes organized, and you realize that silence is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is in this space that you begin to listen to your true needs, those that cannot be met by anyone but yourself. It is in this space that true love is born, not as dependence, but as overflow. When you are self-sufficient, the other ceases to be a crutch and becomes a choice. The silence that liberates is the field where the self manifests, where presence replaces lack, and in that instant you understand what you desperately sought in others has always been within you. But be careful, silence is not an end. It's a journey. It teaches you that peace is also exciting, that calm is not the absence of life, but its abundance. The silence that liberates doesn't eliminate the shadow, but gives space to integrate it. It doesn't erase the wound, but transforms it into a conscious scar. It doesn't destroy desire, but purifies it of compulsion. When you can sit with yourself without dread, you finally understand what it means to individuate yourself. And then, when you love, it will no longer be through lack, but through choice. When you desire, it will no longer be a prison, it will be a celebration. Silence liberates because it shows you that true completeness is not in the other, but in you. It is at this point that the circle closes and at the same time opens, because each time you face yourself, you discover that there is no definitive end, only layers. And it is in this eternal unveiling that the journey continues, calling you to dive even deeper. So tell me, how many times have you called love what was actually just compulsion? How many times have you mistaken another person's calculated silence for depth? How many times was the heat you felt in your body not passion, but the echo of your wound? Do you have the courage to admit that it wasn't fate, it was just your familiar emptiness guiding you back to the same prison? And now, when you look into someone's eyes, will you ask if it's a connection or just your shadow choosing for you? If this tore you up inside, sign up now, because that was just the first cut.